Hello, welcome in, guys. So this is another video. This is Liquid Dose. Hopefully you had a chance to look at my my other video that was detailing the history of a little bit of Freemasonry, the connection to the Moors in Spain, the Vatican, and organized crime, amongst a few other subjects. So today we're going to just kind of delve into a variety of topics. The main topic that we're going to start off with is Freemasonry and the Civil War and its connection to secret societies across time. And the purpose of the first portion with Civil War and the Freemasonry is to demonstrate that if you were a member of the fraternal organization known as Freemasonry, it could save your life at times, or it could prevent you from having a catastrophic event happen to you, especially during the Civil War, which I have a couple stories that I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to offer or display some photos. I'm going to show you my sources. The main source that I'm going to use is, of course, a book titled "The Better Angels of Our Nature: Freemasonry in the American Civil War" by Michael A. Halloran. But that's going to be the first part. In addition to that, I will delve into some individuals that are connected to the secret societies, and again, a little bit of a connection to demonstrate a little bit of the connection to Freemasonry and the ancient societies of the East. And then the second part will delve into Native American Freemasonry in the Americas, pre-European introduction, at least pre-Columbus. There probably was some Vikings. There probably were Vikings that traveled here, as well as the Chinese and most likely the Egyptians, but that's another story. And then the third part, we will discuss Senator LeBlanc, the quote-unquote African-American senator that was prevalent during the Reformation period after the Civil War. And I believe he was a Mason as well, but it will be a nice connection for all these subjects. And we'll talk about phenotypes of briefly discuss phenotypes of some of the indigenous people here. Okay, so stay tuned. So let's get started with the first portion. So, the Civil War was a crazy time with brother fighting against brother, cousin against cousin, and people of many different nationalities and skin tones were involved in this conflict. So it's important to note that even though there were a lot of rapes, a lot of plundering, a lot of murder, there were still some moments where the soldiers were able to maintain a little bit of humanity and show some compassion. But again, it depends on how you want to look at it. But before we get into that, I think it's important to look at why the soldiers who were ordered to kill the enemy or do whatever violence that they were required to do to be victorious, it's interesting to understand why maybe a Union soldier would take care of or treat or give aid to a Confederate soldier. So in many cases, it was because of their membership in either the Rosicrucian fraternity, the Oddfellow fraternity, or the Masonic fraternity. Now, a segue into what that is. Freemasons, they perform reenactments and rituals inside the lodge, of course. They perform in the lodge as a location to where they meet at, a location to where they can have meetings and perform different rituals and just discuss different philosophical concepts. So, but Freemasons perform reenactments and rituals of symbolic events that mirror the cosmos, impart values, and create a sense of cohesion in those that have gone through the process or ordeal of initiation. So this is important. If you think about it, when you're a soldier, you take an oath to follow orders and to defend whatever constitution or dictator, king, or warlord that you're fighting for at the time. But the Masonic Brotherhood seems to have more pull, and people seem to have more value in that above their oaths to the government. Many people would disagree with that and say that, their oath to Masonry actually makes them better. And I'm not here to really debate either way, but more so present stories and, just give you something to think about. This is something that I find interesting. But I could compare the cohesion of Freemasonry from a symbolic aspect, so put that in quotations, to the Roman cult of Mithras or Mithros. So Mithraism was basically Mithras was basically the worship and manifestation of the sun god. So the Mithraic cult, it was really powerful back in the ancient world in Rome. But initiates were taken underground into caves, and they underwent intense rituals and ordeals that created a psychological transformation in the individual. And the same thing can be said for Freemasonry. There is a symbolic death in some of the rituals and a rebirth. So the cult of Mithras was very embedded in the army. You can make a comparison to some of the Prince Hall lodges that are all over the world and very popular with some of the members of the armed forces. And you can also say that the structure of Mithraism was interesting, because even though they really don't have much or if any of the rituals written down that took place in these Mithraic temples, which are always interesting. They were underground a lot of times. But the reason why we know a little bit about them is because of contemporary organizations that had similar rituals and some of the Greek philosophers that have alluded to themselves being members of these organizations. But with the Civil War, let us continue into some of the stories that occurred. So there was a doctor that lived in the South. The doctor was extremely comfortable financially, and he had a wife and several children. So during the Civil War, the opposing forces of the Union and Confederate Army were known for occupying properties of people that lived in the area. And the doctor ended up being a victim of occupation by the Union Army. Now again, I have put the title of the book that I've derived these sources from. I'm not going to give exact names, but I will give you just the overview of the story. But for more details, I would highly suggest getting the audio book off of Audible or Amazon. It's good stuff. Better Angels of Our Nature, Freemasonry in the Civil War by Michael A. Halloran. But yeah, so back to the story. The doctor ended up being a victim of occupation by the Union Army. And the doctor was confronted by a military officer in his living room, and the officer informed him that the soldiers would be commandeering 90% of the doctor's rations. So that would result in him having about 2 weeks to a month of rations, fuel, probably firewood, salt, sugar, all the stuff that would be difficult to get even when there wasn't a conflict occurring. So imagine when you have conflict and muddy roads and just war zones. It's hard to get goods consistently. It's very dangerous. So once the captain ordered the other soldiers into the cellar to obtain their rations, so he sent everyone down like, hey, go and start taking the doctor's stuff. So just like anyone else would imagine, the doctor, observing what was happening and then realizing that his family was going to starve to death. Luckily, the soldiers didn't gang rape the doctor's family, which is very common. This happened quite a bit. You can find stories like that. But the doctor decided to do what any other man would do. So he happened to be a Freemason, so he decided to put his membership to the test and see if he could help him out. So the doctor made his membership in the Masonic fraternity known. It's also the Freemason, or the Masonic fraternity is also known as a craft. So he did a gesture, probably the grand hailing sign, which you can look up online, or some other phrase. Some of the ritual books are available. You can find out these symbols if you're interested. But once the mutual membership had been recognized, the captain walked away from the doctor and stood by the window for a minute in silence. And after some quiet contemplation, the doctor yelled out to his other soldiers to leave the rest of the doctor's supplies in his cellar. But the soldiers probably had taken about 10 to 20% of the doctor's goods. But in addition to the soldiers only taking 10 to 20%, the captain also left a sentry or a guard to protect the doctor from harassment from Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers alike, at least to be a deterrent. But the doctor recorded and relayed this either in a journal or a newspaper, I believe, this story. So showing his Masonic membership saved his life. But that was one of the many stories that demonstrate the potential for love and brotherhood, even in the worst of situations. But the opposite pole of that, because there's duality with everything, although it's also easy to see that this is, I would look at it as a form of, maybe not the exact word, but the energy, it's kind of an elitist, or there's some nepotism there. I'm using these terms as kind of just to give a general idea, like you're looking out for other people because of their membership. These men are proven to be good men because they're in this organization. So it'd be interesting to think whether or not the doctor would have fared the same had he not been in the fraternity. So I think that's something to think about. Because, maybe the house right down the street suffered a very horrible commandeering or theft of their goods, and maybe worse. So, okay, so that was part one. Just giving you a little overview of some of the aspects of how serious people take these membership into some of these mystery schools, or you can call them fraternal organizations. Now we're going to segue into a second part, or should I say the second part of our first segment. And we're going to talk about the story of a soldier who was wounded, and Freemasonry saved his life. So let's segue into that. All right, so there was a Confederate soldier, and this individual was shot in the leg, and the wound was extreme. He ended up being he ended up laying on the battlefield along with several other thousand soldiers who were dead or mangled. We'll call this soldier Jim. So Jim, being wounded, he didn't have any access to water for several days. So unable to move as a result of the gunshot, he was dying of thirst and blood loss. And of course, you can imagine infection was probably starting to set in, so going septic and whatnot. But it just so happened after 3 days of laying on the battlefield or so, plus or minus, a captain from the Union Army was doing a tour of the battlefield, and was going to record everything that he saw. But while he was doing his work, he came across our wounded soldier Jim. Now we'll call the Captain Bob. Captain Bob recognized that Jim was in dire straits, but before Captain Bob had arrived in the field, Jim, as the last, our wounded soldier, as the last desperate effort, either laid out a certificate of his Masonic membership, or some jewels, or we'll say, gold effects, or some type of a square and compass, or some type of object that the other members of Masonry would recognize. So, when Captain Bob came across Jim in his bad state, he dismounted, saw the regalia, and asked Jim if there was something he could do for him. Now, of course, this is the late 1800s. Resources were a little bit scarce and especially in situations like this. But the soldier Jim said, "Hey, I would like some water." And the captain said, "There's lots of other wounded Union soldiers that I can help, but I'll see what I can do." But as a result of the request, the captain came back and gave our wounded soldier Jim some water and a canteen, and this canteen ended up saving Jim's life. And he also had him evacuated from the field, so he had his wounds tended to and everything. And when our soldier Jim escaped this situation, he shared his story with his relatives, who then relayed this message to the public, or something along those lines. Either way, the story was recorded, and we have it today. And you can also check out this story in more detail in our book by Michael Halloran about the Freemasons, okay? So there's certainly, I think, an endless narrative that one could comment about the situation of sparing a man from doom because of his membership in a society. But you know, it was also good to know that the protection that came along with being as a member of this fraternity from another brother anyway, could also extend to men's wives. There are many stories of different women who were about to be raped or had their house and possessions stolen, and when they let the mob of soldiers know, or group of marauders know that they were the wife of a mason that that at times could save their life, or prevent them from having bodily harm. And then the woman next door may have gotten it worse than anyone would want to imagine. So, okay, well, that is our first part. Our next part will segue into Freemasonry, Native American Freemasonry in the Americas, and the connection to the mystery schools in the ancient world.